There we go. Right. Good afternoon. Thank you everyone for joining me this afternoon. So welcome to the Roundtable hosted by myself. I'm Jordan Hayward and Amicus Recruitment. So 2020 has been a bit of a difficult year for all of us. I think that's an understatement, to be honest. Not one we would have anticipated either. So I work for a young startup myself, Amicus Recruitment. We've only been going for about 3.5 years. So I've seen firsthand the challenges that this year has posed. And yeah, I've seen how we've sort of overcome some challenges and how we're sort of, well, fingers crossed, coming out of it the better end. So today I just wanted to have a conversation just to dig a little deeper and to really understand sort of the effects or how people have thrived from brilliant startups and SMEs with guys like yourself. So firstly, we have Remi Tuyaerts. Apologies if the pronunciation is not perfect there. But Remi, you are the CTO and co-founder at LendFlo. LendFlo are obviously a young startup fintech company specialising within the lending sector, which I know have had a few fair challenges this year, especially with sort of government regulations coming out and sort of government schemes coming out. So yeah, I'm sure you've got a few stories to tell from the last few months. But yeah, thanks for joining, Remi. How are you today?
Sure. Yeah, I'm good. Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, no worries at all. Secondly, we have Michael Button. Michael is the CTO and co-founder of a company, a young startup called Ch.AI. Ch.AI have been developing a cutting-edge price prediction tool for the commodities sector. Still an early stage startup. I think this is your second year, isn't it, Michael? So I don't think you were probably planning for what happened this year when you first set up the business, were you?
No, not exactly.
No. How are you today? You okay?
Great, thanks.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks for joining us. Next up, we've got Emmanuel Ide. Again, excuse the pronunciation there if I've got that wrong. But Emmanuel, you are the CTO of Curio, who have developed a web and mobile-based application for users to listen to the best journalism whilst on the move. And I'm sure your application has been used quite a lot for one hot topic this year, hasn't it?
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. How are you today? You okay?
Very good. Thank you, John.
Yeah, good to hear. Thanks for joining us. And finally, we've got David Ives. David, you are the new VP of Engineering over at Pollen, formerly Verve. You guys have developed a fantastic marketplace for sort of live music events, culture, and travel. I'm sure your first 6 months within the business have been a bit of a roller coaster, to say the least.
Yeah, I think making a change into the travel sector was an interesting choice when it first happened. But yeah, it's definitely been interesting.
Yeah. Well, thank you for joining us today and sharing some stories in your first 6 months, which probably hopefully will be the most challenging of your time there, but I'm sure there'll be further things later on down the line that will crop up. But yeah, let's crack straight on. So like I said, my vision for this conversation, I just wanted to get a few people from sort of startups and SMEs just to have an open and honest conversation around sort of how these past 6 months have been, the challenges we've faced, and also sort of how this has helped shape the future, or how it has shaped the future. So I'm going to kickstart. Let's turn back the clock. Probably not many of us want to do that, back to 6 months ago when we were obviously in the middle or the beginning of the pandemic. Things were getting bad across the world. I think Spain had gone into lockdown, France had gone into lockdown, Italy were in lockdown. It was only a matter of time until we were in lockdown as well. At that period, just before we did, I know a lot of companies throughout London were already putting measures in place. A lot of larger companies were also putting measures in place. I think Barclays were probably one of the first to start saying to their employees, right, let's start working from home. We're going to have to adapt to what's about to happen. But as a business, how did you guys prepare Remi, I'll kickstart with you for this one.
Sure. 6 months ago, we were about 20 people smaller than what we are today.
Right.
We were only 7, and we were mostly remote. So for us, not much actually changed during lockdown. Rather than, yeah, it was all very much the same for us. We also went through an acquisition right at the beginning of the lockdown, so that was interesting. But in terms of working, not much has changed. You know, if once you have the tools in place from the get-go, it was pretty easy for us.
Yeah. So you guys were already sort of fully remote anyway, were you?
Yeah, I mean, we had people in London, we had people in Poland, we had people in Ireland, and yeah, it was just almost business as usual.
Yeah. Okay, that's fantastic.
We were lucky.
Yeah, one of the lucky ones. Emmanuel, how about yourself? How did you guys prepare and set yourselves up for what was about to happen?
Well, we're in the business of watching the news very closely. So as soon as the news of the COVID emerged, we just decided that we should be fully remote. So we communicated to the rest of the team that it was likely to become bigger than it was. And so we made the decision so everybody feels safe, that everybody should basically work from home. And it's part of our DNA to be co-located anyway. So we've got people in India, people in America. So it was not so much of a pain. We just had to learn how to work remotely anyway. That was working quite well. But I think it was quite important to see the signs as they were coming, because anxiety builds up very quickly. So we addressed it as soon as we could.
Yeah, fantastic. How was that shift from, I know obviously you've mentioned there you've done a bit of remote work and you have co-locations. How was the shift going from being in the office with partly remote to we're fully remote now?
Well, you miss the chat at the coffee machine and stuff like that when when you want to have a quick 5 or 10 minutes chat, then you end up having to book a meeting, or so you just adjust really. But it doesn't take time, I think, for people who are used to work remotely to adjust and then and start socializing again. It's a bit more difficult, but yeah, that worked quite well for us.
Yeah, fantastic. Michael, how about yourself?
We were all based in London, and we didn't actually have many people working remotely. Most people were in the office most days, though we had to go through a phase of making sure everybody was able to work remotely and had the proper equipment available at home basically for our team. I mean, but we're a tech company as well, so I think that we come from a finance background where perhaps there's a bit more suspicion or cynicism around remote working. Because everyone's working in tech, there's really nothing that they can't do remotely that they can do in the office, apart from, as Emmanuel mentioned, those quick chats that sort of take an hour when you're working remotely, but take 2 seconds when you're in the office sitting next to someone.
Yeah. Okay, fantastic. So how did sort of the team in general react to sort of going fully remote for you guys?
It varied quite a lot by individual. I think some people sort of reacted to the coronavirus crisis slightly differently than others in our experience. I think we got quite quickly good at our Slack and being more careful about remote communication and things like that. So actually it was fairly smooth. I think it was a bit annoying, people having to sort of work in cramped flats in London or something without proper debt, things like that, just little practical things.
Yeah, working off the kitchen table, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And David, it must have been very early on for you at Pollen. You must have just joined at that point.
Yeah, it was literally my first week was due to be when lockdown started.
Yeah.
So I went from an interview in the office to working fully remote from day one.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, as a company, our sector, we were watching it very heavily as well, because it was had a massive influence on us. Spring break is one of our key revenue streams, so this is something that we were watching closely. Yeah. But from a company perspective, we have a work where you want, when you want policy anyway. So everybody in the company is given the opportunity to work flexibly and do whatever they feel is needed to be effective. So it was relatively straightforward for us. We had the tools and the process in place anyway to make sure that people were able to kind of work where it worked best for them.
Yeah.
I think I agree. One of the things that we really found was difficult is people were used to working from home for a couple of days rather than working fully remotely. And that idea of, there was a brilliant example. We had exactly the same thing. People sharing a flat, 4 people in a flat in London, fighting over broadband and fighting over the kitchen table was very real. So that's probably the biggest struggle that we found on a personal level. It was important for us to make sure that people felt safe. So we discussed this very early on. And gave people the opportunity to do whatever they wanted and whatever they felt comfortable with early. So, we've said it affected different people differently. So, some people, this was something that from a health perspective, they were very concerned with. So we gave them the freedom to do whatever they needed to.
Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. And I guess, so like you just said there, David, it was, you had the people in sort of a couple of days a week, remotely a couple of days a week. Michael, you said you didn't really have anyone sort of working remotely before this. Going from that to sort of, working from home 100% of the time, like you said, small flats in London, 4 people fighting over broadband. How did you keep your team and your employees motivated, and how did you keep the team gelling, I suppose? And David, I'll start with you on that one.
I think we were lucky that we already had that sort of culture, but this was very different. So the communication within individual teams and squads was always very strong, but it was making sure that the company itself was communicating on a much broader scale. So we were having, a couple of times a week, a company all hands just to really talk about sort of progress and where we were and where we thought we needed to be. So sort of from the leadership team all the way through, there was very open conversation early to make sure that everybody in the company knew what was going on at all times, rather than it just being quite localized.
Yeah. Okay. And Michael, how about yourself? How did you keep your team motivated, and how did you keep that sort of team bond together?
I mean, in terms of like the sort of keeping the culture going, it was something we were quite concerned about. We basically instituted like we had daily calls for the whole all hands team, and trying not to make it like a sort of your usual progress update meeting. We're just kind of checking in and making sure everyone's okay. And we had like just stupid competitions about who was the best dressed and who posted the best emoji yesterday. In terms of motivation, I think in some ways it was actually really good. I think with the sort of technical staff that I am responsible for, then being able to work remotely in a lot of ways meant they could be more self-directed in their work. And I think we were probably gave them a little bit more freedom to choose what they were working on. And actually, especially because lockdown was so boring to start with, people working crazy hours and were really motivated and really interested in what they were doing and putting in pull requests on Saturday night and things like this. That sort of, I mean, at least to start with, and then I think it got a bit boring, and that maybe ebbed a bit.
Yeah, I think that's the same for everyone. I think it was more the situation of, right, it's fine to work fully remotely, but then when you can't go out to the pub or out to the cinema after that, and you're still sat in similar rooms, and I think that's when it got, for me personally, I think the first few weeks were okay. It was very new to us guys as a business. We don't really work on a remote basis. We're in the office 5 days a week. We're surrounded sort of by salespeople, and it's going from that to fully remote. It was good to begin with. It was new, it was exciting, but then 2-3 weeks down the line, when you haven't seen anyone else other than the same 4 walls that you've been in, it got a bit of a struggle to continue motivating yourself and things like that. But Emmanuel, how about yourself? How did you sort of keep motivating your team and keep gelling, keep that team gelling?
The same as David said, all hands weekly, so trying to keep a cadence. So we've got also, we are using Scrum, for example, as a framework for development. So that's bringing in this kind of cadence so they can anticipate meetings on a weekly basis. So that's giving some milestones basically for the week, so people can can find ways to work around that. And I think it's super important to keep that cadence, even more important than when you're in an office. So that works pretty well for us. And recently we introduced as well Wednesday free meetings. So try to keep all the meetings out of that day so that people can also focus on deliveries and on desktop time. And it has been welcomed very warmly.
Yeah, fantastic. I guess it's a different, different sort of approach to that, but yeah, no, really beneficial. Remi, you've obviously, well, you work fully remotely anyway. You're an expert in keeping your teams motivated and gelling then, I suppose. How do you go about it?
What was interesting for us was hiring people on lockdown and bringing new members to the team when really you've never met them. And it was very interesting to, you know, how do you introduce somebody to, I mean, your code base, but also your culture when I mean, you never meet them. That was quite interesting for us. Really, the key thing was trying to have, we actually never did like daily stand-ups, set daily stand-ups. So it was rather keeping the communication open as much as possible. We really insist on like people just be responsive on Slack, rather than say, okay, every day for 15 minutes in the morning, you know, you have a meeting and everybody looks at each other. Okay, what have you been doing? Oh, same thing than yesterday. All right. that was really what we wanted to avoid, is having these meetings. We ended up doing like Friday evening drinks, and rather than just having a drink where you don't have much to talk about, we were organizing. Everybody was organizing a game a week, and so we had like things going on like that in each squad. So yeah, that was interesting. It's an interesting question on what's going to happen next. Is okay when you hired all these people remote, and then they're going to slowly start to come back in the office. How is the culture going to change? Is it going to change? Is it just going to be the same old? That's something that I spent a lot of time thinking and sort of worrying about what was going to happen when people are going to finally come back. So yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It is always difficult. I mean, everyone's had to sort of hire remotely. Everyone's had to onboard remotely. I know, yeah, there's so many companies out there still hiring, and it's just, yeah, it has been that added challenge because you don't get the same sort of, you don't get the same feel for someone as if you were to meet them sort of face to face. I mean, Emmanuel, you've hired a few sort of people over sort of lockdown as well. How have you found that adaptation in sort of changing your interview process to fully remote?
It forced us to really ramp up our game in terms of onboarding. When I joined the company, when it was just 3 or 4 of us, and you know, you play a bit by ear in terms of onboarding process, but when you start onboarding people remotely, that's forcing you to rethink that. And so we spend much more time thinking about onboarding, what is the material you want to share, making sure that we've got the right the people joining feel welcome and feel that they've got all the resources available, and they've got listening ears available whenever they've got questions. So all of that was thought through in much more detail. So we took that as an opportunity really to ramp up our game in terms of onboarding.
Yeah. And how did you go about like embedding people into the company and like the training side of things? Was that like a sort of set on a daily basis, or did you say you set them tasks at the beginning of the week to sort of like reading tasks and things like that? How did you go about the training side of things?
Well, the stage Ch.AI is at, we are a small startup, so we are focusing on hiring senior people, so they can basically hit the road running very quickly. Everything is in place, so they know where the furniture is, they know what their role is. So as part of the onboarding process, I found it was super important to be very clear on what the role is, and then that's facilitating the work for them and for everyone very much.
Yeah, okay. David, how about yourself? How's hiring been in your first 6 months and throughout lockdown?
I mean, luckily we've got a really strong hiring framework anyway. So the interview process is very well regulated and laid out, and everybody knows exactly what they're supposed to be doing in there. So that's not been too difficult. the later stages in the interview, the kind of on-sites have obviously had to change significantly, and you do miss a lot about not sitting the opposite side of the table to someone. You know, being on a screen, I think is a strange experience for a candidate and for a panel as well. There's something to get used to there. With the onboarding, I mean, again, it's something that we've worked quite hard at, and it's quite strong anyway, but we have had to modify it quite heavily. I think, as Emmanuel said, the really important thing has been the clarity. It's quite disconcerting for a new starter to be sat at home with a laptop thinking, I'm not sure if I'm actually going in the right direction or not, because we set everybody up with a buddy anyway, so they've got someone to lean on for the first month. But it can be quite distancing. It can be quite a lonely position to be in when you kind of in a stand up. You don't know people's names. You don't really know sort of who's who. Yeah. So we try to make it as tight as we possibly can in the first couple of days, and again, over communicate, make sure that we're giving as much feedback as we possibly can. Sort of show and tells at the end of every week. We make sure that new starters get involved in those, even if they're just showing that they've got their machine set up, just to try and get them involved and make sure that they feel part of the team as quick as they can.
Yeah. Yeah, it can be daunting going into a new role within an office anyway, so I can only assume it's even more challenging when you're doing it remotely. I think the difficult thing as well, when you mentioned there, it's difficult for a panel to interview as well on those final stages. But the added challenge you have, the panel is actually in separate areas as well, so you've got sort of 3-4 people on a call, and it can be quite difficult to sort of not interrupt each other or talk over each other, which takes sort of the nice fluid flow out of an interview as well. So yeah, Michael, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I agree on the sort of panel interviewing thing, and generally in meetings, that is one thing we've noticed in terms of face-to-face meetings having an advantage. We only hired one member of staff during lockdown, and yeah, as others have said, it was fine. I mean, it was similar to our normal interview process, but there is just something about not meeting someone face-to-face that you don't get the same sort of human vibe off them. Mm-hmm. But we did, yeah. It ended up their hire. Was a friend anyway, so so that kind of makes it a little bit easier. Onboarding, we had like David, one member of staff who we interviewed and then who joined just after lockdown. So we've only met them once, which is really weird when they're now like on the call every day. We have a slight advantage in that we're quite a small team. So 12 of us. So you can kind of get to know everyone and get to know the business. And we have, as I mentioned, calls every day with everyone involved. So it's quite quick. And I think we sort of made a conscious effort to try and ensure they were included in everything, and everyone was being nice to them.
Yeah, good to hear. I'm sure everyone's been partaking in a pub quiz over Zoom as well to embed everyone in, haven't they? So yeah, but perfect. So what I wanted to find out next was, in terms of obviously onboarding, working remotely, it faces its own challenges in general, but as a business, I've spoken to some people within the industry. They've not thrived off of what's happened, but it's sort of really sort of boosted what they've been doing and helped them sort of grow as a business, I suppose. But what challenges as a business have you faced? Michael, what would you say the biggest business challenges you faced is?
I mean, it's been quite mixed in a sense, because of the stage we're at and the business we're in terms of, like, a lot of it is like the sales side of things, which we thought would, a lot of the potential clients would find it hard to sell. But on the other hand, they've all been working from home as well. So they've all got a lot more time to sit there and to think about potentially onboarding new products. So so it's sort of been mixed in that sense. And also we're in risk management. So we've at least been trying to spin it as you can use our tool. Is extra beneficial during periods of high market volatility, as we've experienced over the last few months. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, it's actually been reasonably good in a sense, in terms of being able to get engaged with clients, which has been the main area of focus for us.
Yeah, of course. Perfect. And David, obviously being within tourism and leisure, and I'm sure Pollen have sort of faced a lot of challenges, and yeah, with obviously, well, a big part of your business is like live music events, isn't it? So, which there hasn't been any of. So, how have you guys faced, and what would you say sort of the biggest challenges have been for you?
Yeah, I mean, it was our main revenue stream was hit hard. I mean, obviously festivals and the kind of the US college market is massive for us, which is the first things that were going to be affected and the last things that are going to be opened up again.
Yeah.
Luckily, and I think this is kind of testament to the quality of the business and the leadership team and the strategy. We had another product which was kind of in development at the time, which is aimed at a much smaller group. So it's much more akin to like an online travel agent. So we were able to accelerate that and launch that during the pandemic, which has been incredible to actually launch a new product, which is now exceeding all the targets we had. So we've actually opened up an entirely new business model while we've been doing it. We've put the other one on hold. Obviously, there's still work going on in the background, but we've been able to kind of not reinvent the business, but just open ourselves up to a completely different set of customers, which has just been phenomenal. You know, we're growing in an industry that's shrinking rapidly, so it's actually been amazing for us. But it's a huge amount of hard work by the team to get us there. It just shows that sort of, you know, sometimes out of adversity, if you've got the right strategy and the right team with the right attitude, you can do something pretty special.
Yeah. No, that's brilliant. Yeah, I don't know a huge amount of companies that have actually released a full sort of new product during the pandemic, which is great. You mentioned there you've had another one that's been put on hold. How has it set you back by a long way, or is it just something that's, like you said, you're working on in the background and it will sort of ramp up again sort of in the near future?
Well, I mean, we're still working on like the curation of the product itself.
Yeah.
With the status as it is, especially in the US, where it's still unclear when things are going to become available again. We can do the back office work. What we can't really do is sell the product at the moment because it's not a viable product to put in front of our audience.
Yeah.
So it's still a core part of our business. You know, festivals are always going to be a massive part of what we do. We want to provide the best experiences for people we can, however that is. This is just a slightly different direction to get there in a market that's probably a little bit more of an opportunity for us right now.
Yeah, of course. No, I think a lot of people are waiting for festivals to reopen, myself included. So, Emmanuel, how about yourself? Because I know, so obviously you've got a web and mobile-based application. I assume a lot of your customer base listen, well, say for example, around London, they listen to or use your product whilst commuting on the tube and things like that. What are the biggest challenges you've faced, and have you been sort of seriously affected by what's going on?
So yeah, the product fits into people's lives. So typically, yes, a lot of our users listen to the content during their commute, and so when COVID started, that builds up some momentum. You know, we tried very quickly to understand how the habits will change and will shift, and with more and more people staying at home and not commuting, how we could serve them in the best way, and how to really think about it. So there was a lot of thinking, there were a lot of analysis about change of habits and how our users, a lot of interviews. We reached out to a lot of our users trying to understand how this was impacting their lifestyle and how their usage of the app was changing, and then adapting to it. So that's creating a big momentum for us, which was very positive, because at the end, when you're I guess at any stage of a company, you need to do that all the time. You need to really question yourself all the time. Conditions outside changes, and how do you adapt to it? And the COVID situation was a great momentum for that. So we had to adapt, and what we witnessed, for example, you know, the obvious, people started using desktop much more than the apps, for example, or home-based devices like Alexa. Much more.
Yeah.
So our strategy didn't change that much, but tactically we had to really adjust to prioritize some of the development and features to align with that.
Yeah. Okay. Fantastic. Yeah. I think as a business we've sort of readjusted and had a bit of a sort of a reshuffle as to how we can, and sort of the change in sort of behaviours from sort of candidates and people like that. So we've had to sort of, similar to what you've said, really analyse what sort of the market wants and how they want to move forward and sort of adjust with it. So I completely understand where you're coming from there. Remi, how about yourself? Other than the lights keep going off there, what challenges have you faced as a business?
Yeah, well, I'm actually back in the office, so it's very odd that and it's interesting. We're in the business of lending to SMEs, so in a way, more people need more money now than ever. They were very much helped by government schemes and things like that. Yet you don't really want to lend to anybody because nobody has a viable business model. Like most SMEs at least have a viable business model. So in these times, so yeah, it was interesting. We sort of so because we went through an acquisition at the same time, we're rebuilding the company and the product and the image of what we're selling from scratch, and like really trying to take what learnings from the market and trying to adapt. We'll see how it goes, but realistically, it's lending as a whole is going to change drastically. The way you analyze risk, I'm sure Michael, you must have seen it, but the way risk is analyzed now is completely it needs to change for it to be adapted. I mean, traditionally risk has been analyzed on very static data sets, and you have to now look at something much more dynamic. So it's been interesting. We haven't, when lockdown started, we were not really live with the product, but we were sort of testing it, and then lockdown happened, and we took this opportunity to almost scratch what we had and start from fresh. So so yeah, we'll see. We'll see in a few months if it was a successful, or if it was a good idea or not.
That's it. Though you mentioned those government schemes, I know how much of an impact have they really had on sort of the lending sector as a whole, and sort of I guess you guys as a business?
Huge. Huge, because you're lending for free practically. This is what's happening now. You're giving money with 100% guarantee that you'll get paid back, because if it's not the client, it'll be the government. It'll be interesting what will happen in when people are going to start collecting repayments. Are people going to be able to pay back, or is the government going to have to stump up the bill? And if they are, when are they going to do that? So it'll be very interesting to see what happens to lenders in a few months. And there's some people that have already suffered, alternative lenders that have gone down already. We'll see.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. I guess what I also wanted to cover is, going into 2020, I suppose everyone's plans were very different to what they are now. Have people's or your business's growth plans been stumped, or where have you thrived? So obviously, Remi, I know you mentioned there, at the beginning of lockdown, you were 20 people less than what you are now. Would you say you've sort of thrived off what's happened, and how do you see sort of the next sort of 6 to 12 months looking for you guys from a growth perspective?
We'll keep growing. Like I said, we closed an acquisition round, and therefore that gave us a lot of capital and a lot of room to grow. So, and we were not generating much revenue beforehand anyways. So now the equity that we got just allows us to grow, and hopefully when we start generating revenue, it'll be significant. But we'll see. So yeah, for us, lockdown hasn't really affected growth. If anything, what happened on the side of lockdown affected growth in a positive way. So yeah.
Yeah. And David, how about yourself? Looking towards the future, the next sort of 3, 6, 12 months, or 3 to 5 years, how are you guys looking to sort of continue growing now, and what sort of strategies have you got in place to sort of continue that growth and excelling as a business?
I think our original model is, obviously the plan is to be able to get that back on track as well, and get those growth patterns that we were seeing there. Is to increase what we've had to accelerate now. We've brought that much forward, so our model has changed slightly. We're still growing rapidly, but it's a slightly different direction than we thought we would. So some of the trajectory is not exactly as we expected. It's actually been more positive. I think going forward, we got plans within the business to move a lot of things away from being that sort of partnership model, is to have a lot more exclusivity in the events that we run. One of the advantages that we've had during this time is the artists that we deal with have not really got any other outlet at the moment. So we're providing them a service that nobody else can. So we're building incredibly strong relationships with them and putting ourselves in a really strong position in the market. Mm-hmm. And also with the other end of the curation as well, with the holidays and with the travels, with the hotels, and the travel side, we're obviously providing them with an opportunity to generate revenue that they didn't have before. So our model is to become much more than a marketplace. It's to become somewhere where we're going to offer experiences that nobody else can. So that exclusivity is what's really big for us, and that's our main plan of growth now.
Yeah. Okay. So is it all about sort of pipelining now and getting those relationships in place, and sort of really solidifying those relationships early on, so you sort of in the long run you can continue that growth?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the pipeline we've got is incredibly strong. The team that deal with that side of the business are working so hard at the moment. They have been for the last couple of months. This is a really cool thing for them to focus on. It's a really bright future that we got ahead of us. So it's been a difficult situation for the business. Obviously, we've had to slim the business in some areas at the beginning of this process, just because those areas of market weren't available to us. Mm-hmm. But now we're kind of the sort of recovery is starting to show on that we're able to bring those people back into the business and actually grow in the areas that we really wanted to.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Michael, how about yourself? Year 2 within business. Obviously, going into 2020, I'm sure you had different plans for what's actually happened. But how are you now looking forward to the next sort of 6 to 12 months or sort of 5-year plan?
I mean, in terms of sort of our business strategy, I think it hasn't changed overly much given the sort of market landscape we are in. I think if anything, we probably slightly decelerated the sales process and redoubled our effort and focused a bit more resource on developing the product and establishing product market fit. So more sort of the hires were in, and the investment was in on the R&D side probably than it would have been otherwise. I think also we sort of looking forward a year, looking at our runway, we decided that maybe the sort of investment landscape wasn't going to be so great if we're looking to raise another round in a year's time. So we did take the advantage of some of the government help as well, and with our existing investment network to kind of raise some more money now in anticipation of hitting a wall in a year's time. And if it's going to be very hard to raise money then, depending on what happens with the economy.
Yeah, perfect. And Emmanuel, how about yourself? How are you looking forward to the future? More news, I suppose.
Yeah, more news. Remi touched on it a little bit. For us, data is super important. So we've started investing in modern data stack, and we are investing a lot in really creating insight, real-time insight for us to understand how our users are using the app, different habits, different cohorts of users. We've got different type of people with different type of usage. So what COVID taught us is, things can change very rapidly. People can change their habit very, very rapidly. And in terms of product development, you need that insight almost in real time to be able to adjust your roadmap to accommodate with these changes. So data is super important for us, and there is a big investment we are doing in that space.
Yeah, brilliant. So another area I'd like to cover. We've kind of touched on remote working and things like that, but it's always, especially within IT and especially within London, remote working has always been sort of a real hot topic of debate. I know some companies have always worked remotely. Remi, your company obviously work fully remotely. There's some that work partially remotely, David, Emmanuel, and there's companies that don't typically work remotely, which Michael obviously, like you said, you don't typically work fully remotely, but how do you see this moving forward? I mean, is anyone back in the office at the moment? Remi, you mentioned you're back in the office. Is it, well, yeah, and how are you looking sort of moving forwards? Are you going to continue with remote working, or are you going to look to build out sort of an engineering team or a team in an office in London or elsewhere?
Yeah, I'm actually in Amsterdam in another office that we have in Amsterdam, and
Right.
we moved office in London during lockdown. So because we hired more people, and we were thinking at some point those people are going to have to come back, so we had to actually move to a new office in London. In London, people are like, we've taken this approach of letting people choose what they want. So everything is in place in the office. If they want to come to the office, there is a one-way system, and hand cleaning things everywhere. Like, everything is there if they want to come to the office. And it's funny, there's some people that prefer to come every day to the office. They just don't want to take the tube or something like that, but a lot of people come anyways. And some others, especially new people that we've hired, have said there's no chance I will come for the next 6 months. And that's fine. I mean, it's really we've always said, you can't force people to come in the office in circumstances like this, but everything's in place if people want to.
Mm-hmm.
So
do you think this will change the market in general, though? So personally, I've noticed more companies offering fully remote. I've even spoken to some startups where they've had a physical office in London, but at the beginning of lockdown, their contract came to the end and they didn't renew anything, or they just terminated their contract with their office space. How do you feel sort of the market will change in terms of, well, I guess from a candidate perspective as well?
I think it really depends at what stage you are. If you're sort of rolling and, there's a set pro roadmap, and, you have your KPIs that you have to hit, and I think it's fine to work fully remote. So it really depends the stage that you are. We're at the stage right now where it's very beneficial to be in a room and to be able to brainstorm in a room, and it's impossible to brainstorm through Zoom. People write documents and you comment on it, but I mean, it's not as useful as being in front of a whiteboard. Is the next startup idea? If somebody cracks that problem, there it is. So I think it really depends on what stage you are in a company. I'm sure, David, you guys are more substantial. I'm sure you have your processes in place, and it's easier to say to just keep going. We're at the stage where it's very useful to be in a room. So yeah, I think it depends. It depends where you are.
Yeah. Okay.
In your journey.
Perfect. Michael, how about yourself? Obviously, you haven't really typically worked fully remotely before. What are your plans moving forward? Are you back in the office yet?
Yeah, we have kept the office open during the whole period.
Have you?
I've been going quite a bit now. I think it's going to be really hard to mandate people coming back to the office. I think from a sort of staffing point of view, it really varies, as Remi said, with the individual. What we have seen, some people are very keen to get back in, and some people are like never coming back into the office. Though I have sort of noticed the last few weeks, people are now actually getting to be a bit more interested in coming back in and having a bit more of the social thing, which is, I mean, after all, part of the reason we go to work. So I think our plans are I think it's very hard to imagine we're going to go back to having 4 or 5 days in the office, and we'll be much more flexible going forward. Maybe having like 1 day in the office. And the other thing we have is we've got staff who have moved country during lockdown and gone back to their home countries, and so it's actually for them coming back to London, there's a lot of the hassle of renting and finding somewhere to live and the expense. So, I mean, it's a bit up in the air. I think we'll see what happens. I think it's going to be very hard. I can't imagine us going back to having full on 4 or 5 days a week in the office though.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've noticed, I've spoken to a lot of candidates over the past few months, and yeah, a lot of people have either moved outside of London or they've moved back to their home countries, like you said. I think a lot of it is to save costs, because I don't suppose London's the best place to be if you're in a fully locked down society. So, but David, how about yourself? I know obviously you said you're quite well set up. You've done sort of partial, like part remote, part working in the office. How do you think you'll sort of manage things moving forward? Or will it be on like a case by case basis, depending on the employee, or will you have sort of processes in place for that?
Yeah, the first thing we did is we asked individuals what they felt comfortable with.
Yeah.
There's obviously some health implications with people that mean they have to be much more careful about things. But as we've said, the office is a very sociable environment, and a lot of people have been very desperate to get back. It's depended very much on people's own circumstance. I'm at home with my family, so I'm quite happy to be at home.
Yeah.
If you are in that position where you're sharing a flat with 4 other people, the thought of actually being able to get out in an open space is probably something that's really appealing to actually change that environment. So what we've done is very similar. We've got a one-way system, we've got hand washing, but we've also reduced the capacity in the office and had it on a sort of rota basis where you kind of apply for the days that you want to be in. So we know that we're not oversubscribed on any days, but the uptake's been really high. We've got a relatively young team, so for them, quite a large part of their social life is around the people that they work with as well. So they've been very keen to get back into that environment. It's been something that we want to give people the flexibility, but people's safety is the primary thing with this. It's interesting that I agree. I think the newer starters are the ones that are a little bit more reluctant to go in, whereas the people that have been with the company a while are the ones that want to get back and see their friends and their colleagues again. Mm-hmm. I don't think we're ever going to be the same again. I think people have got very used to being much more flexible, and it is going to be very interesting to see how this plays out and what we can do to accommodate it now.
Yeah. Interesting you say about the capacity situation. Well, before lockdown began, I know a few companies, I was working with a couple of companies that were doing similar things where they had it on a rotated basis, and it would be interesting to see. I think a lot more companies, especially sort of mid to large corps, I think they're going to have to operate like that for a very long time. I don't think it's ever going to sort of be where everyone can go back in the office full time. So interesting you sort of implementing that now. Emmanuel, how about yourself? What are your plans moving forward? I know you guys offer sort of quite good remote options anyway. Are you going to go to sort of fully remote, or are you back in the office yourselves?
Not yet, no. We are assessing the situation regularly, so we just make sure that everybody's involved in that discussion. There is not much appetite at the moment to come back to the office. So everybody will still work remotely, but we just make sure that we are assessing the situation regularly, and we make sure that everybody's involved in that discussion. But right now, everybody's working.
Yeah. Are your staff looking forward to getting back in, do you know, or?
Some of them, yes, some of them not. So yeah, I think what is important is just to keep that discussion going, and to be sure that everyone in the company feels the agency to stay home, or if they want a social space and to turn back to the office, then the company has got to provide with that facility as well. So yes, we just assess the situation on a regular basis. Yeah.
Okay. Perfect. Conscious of time, so I just wanted to cover sort of one final area, just sort of key things that you've taken from these past 6 months. It's been an experience, not the best experience ever. I'm sure everyone's learned a hell of a lot from it, has taken a lot from it sort of to move forward as well. Emmanuel, what sort of are the key things that you've taken away from these past few months, and how has that helped shape your future from a business perspective or a personal perspective?
Sorry, can you say that again? I missed a bit of the question.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just saying, what are your key takeaways from what's happened this year, and how's that sort of shapes your future as a business and sort of personally, and sort of the team as well?
I think it is. It is about adapting to change, and I think any startup, especially, goes through various phases very quickly, and the COVID situation was really an opportunity for us to reflect on how we adapt to change. So that's something which is, I think, critical. Remi was saying, how we assess risk in the financial sector, but how do you assess risk from a business perspective? Any change outside is a risk to the business, and you need to be able to adapt to it. So it was really a real-time lab for us to test our ability to adapt to change. And I think that's something we're investing a lot of energy and effort into it, and we will carry on doing so.
Yeah, okay, perfect. Michael, how about yourself? What have you taken away from these past few months?
I mean, a lot of it has been remote working, as we've decided, learning how to do that in a way that's effective, and what doesn't. I mean, I think most from a bonding experience, it reminds me a little bit of working through the collapse of Lehman Brothers in terms of actually sort of through the crisis, and we've actually kind of all mucked in and got on with it quite well. So in some sense, there's been a lot of positive, which is nice for us to say.
Yeah, perfect. I think we've lost you at the beginning there, but we got that end piece there. Remi, how about yourself? What have you learned from this past sort of 6 months? What have you taken away, and what are you going to take on board to shape your future?
I don't know. It's a difficult one. I think it was at the beginning. It was very hard to stop working, and I think it was the same for a lot of people in the company, because you're always in this. I think we touched on it earlier. You're always in the same room. You're always in the same place, and especially when you're a founder, it's what you think of all the time. But now you don't have this thing of, okay, I'm going to work, and then when you're on your journey back, you can sort of clear your head. You don't have that anymore. You're just always thinking about it, and always, it could be working. Or what else can I do? Watch a series. It's just you. So yeah, I think it's the importance of just maybe sometimes trying to stop or separate, work and maybe more relaxed time. I think that's the key. Somebody said earlier that people doing pull requests on Saturday evening. I mean, we've had the same thing, and I was concerned. I told the guys, look, just try to take your weekends, even if you do something else, even if you're on the computer, but don't do a pull request on the weekend. But yeah, I think that's the importance of stopping, of being able to stop. That's probably the takeaway. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, it's all about that healthy work-life balance, I suppose, isn't it? And I know I struggled. So I'm in quite a small flat myself, and it was hard to sort of go between sort of your working day and then back to sort of your social. It was just hard to break up. So no, I completely understand. David, finally with you, what have you learned from this? And
I agree with everything everyone said. I think the one area we've always been good at it, but I think it's been hugely important over this period is just communication, constant communication, and complete transparency with everything. There's been some difficult business decisions that have been had to made in the company. But by being open and talking about them early and making sure that everyone's involved and they've got context, it kind of makes it a little bit easier for everyone to understand. And that sort of clarity about what it is that we're trying to achieve just allows people to be much more autonomous and sort of take accountability for things. And I think that's what's really helped us with people being distributed, is with everybody really being 100% focused on what it is that we're trying to achieve. They've been able to go and make those decisions themselves without needing a framework around them. So everybody's felt that they can take a lot of ownership, and they can actually have impact in the success that we've been able to create.
Yeah. Perfect. Right, yeah, like I said, I'm very conscious of time. I appreciate sort of everyone taking an out of their day. It is 1 o'clock, so let's sign off. David, a massive thank you to yourself for joining. I hope, festivals start opening up soon, and your main stream of revenue starts coming back. I'll know I'll be at a festival as soon as they do open. So massive thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
No worries at all. Emmanuel, you as well. Thank you for joining us. I'm sure there'll be some more hot topics in the news, and people are going to continue using Curio's app. And yeah, I'm sure you'll continue to thrive and grow over the next sort of 6, 12 months and years ahead.
It was a pleasure. Thank you, Jordan.
Thank you. Remi, you've taken some challenges throughout these last few months, like you said. I know the lending market has been a challenging environment as it has been. So, but it sounds great that you guys have continued to grow. So I hope, yeah, everything continues to go well, and as a business, you can continue to thrive as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Michael, thank you for joining us as well. Year 2's been very interesting for you, I suppose. Hopefully year 3's slightly less challenging, but as it is as a startup, it's going to continue to throw challenges at you. But thank you for joining us as well, Michael.
Cheers, Jordan.
No worries at all. Well, thanks, guys, and have a great rest of the day.
You too.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.